He had always known that speaking the truth in that house came with a price. The house was quiet that evening. The kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder than it should. The ticking wall clock in the living room felt like it was counting down something important, even though no one else seemed to notice. The young man sat on the edge of his bed, phone resting in his palm, screen dark but heavy with meaning. He hadn't planned for the call to come that night. He had hoped it wouldn't come at all. Downstairs, the stepfather's voice carried through the house. Loud, confident, certain of itself. That voice always filled every room, even when he wasn't in it. It was the voice of someone who believed he was always right, someone who didn't question his own authority. To him, respect was not something you earned by understanding others. It was something you demanded. The young man took a slow breath. He had learned to do that over the years. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. Stay calm. Don't react. Don't give him what he wants. The phone VIBR. ATED. Once, short, controlled. He looked at the screen. No name, just a number he had memorized long ago, even though he hoped he'd never need to. His chest tightened, but his face stayed still. He stood up quietly and stepped into the hallway. That was when the stepfather noticed. Where do you think you're going? The man snapped from the living room. The young man stopped. He didn't turn around right away. He knew that tone. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. I need to take this, he said calmly. Holding up the phone, the stepfather laughed, sharp and dismissive. At this hour? Don't tell me it's another one of your so-called important calls. The young man hesitated. He could lie. He could say it was a friend. He could say it was work. That would be easier. But he was tired of lying to make others comfortable. It's serious, he said. I need some privacy. That was the wrong thing to say. The stepfather stood up, filling the doorway with his broad frame. He crossed his arms, eyes narrowed, already convinced he knew the truth. You've been saying things like that for years, always acting like something big is about to happen. Always pretending you're more important than you are. The young man finally turned around. Their eyes met. He saw the same look he had seen since he was a teenager. The look that said, "You're nothing without me." The look that said, "I decide what's real here." "I'm not pretending," the young man said. "I really need to take this." The phone vibrated again. The stepfather's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "Let me guess," he said. "Some secret job? Some government nonsense? What is it tonight?" The young man swallowed. He didn't want to say it. He knew what would happen if he did. But the call couldn't wait. "It's from someone connected to the Pentagon," he said quietly. For a moment, there was silence. Then the stepfather burst out laughing. The sound echoed through the house, loud and mocking. "The Pentagon," he repeated. "You expect me to believe that?" The young man didn't answer. He stepped toward the back door, but the stepfather moved quickly, blocking his path. "You think you can just say a word like that and suddenly you matter?" The stepfather said. "You think that makes you special?" "I'm not asking you to believe me," the young man replied. His voice stayed even, but his heart was racing. "I'm asking you to let me take the call." The stepfather shook his head. "No, I'm done with this. You're not walking out of my house pretending you're some kind of government asset." The word "my" hit hard, like it always did. This house was a place where the young man slept, not a place where he belonged. He had learned that early on. The phone vibrated a third time. This time, the young man answered it. He stepped back, creating just enough space, and put the phone to his ear. "I'm here," he said softly. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and urgent. It spoke in short sentences. No emotion. No wasted words. The kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to be taken seriously. "Yes," the young man replied. "I understand." The stepfather leaned in, trying to hear every word. "I'm at the address," the young man continued. "Yes, I'll be ready." Paused, listening. "Understood," he said again. "I'll wait." He ended the call and lowered the phone. The room felt different now. He could feel it in the air, like pressure building before a storm. The stepfather stared at him, lips pressed tight. "Nice acting," he said. "Who was that? One of your friends playing along?" The young man looked at him steadily. "They're coming," that was all he said. The stepfather scoffed. "Who's coming?" "They are." The stepfather laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "You think black cars are going to roll up here because you said a few words on the phone?" "I didn't say black cars," the young man replied. That made the stepfather pause for half a second. Not long enough to admit doubt, but long enough for it to slip in. "You're unbelievable," the stepfather said. "Always making things up. Always trying to look important." The young man didn't argue. He didn't explain. He knew explanations never worked in that house. Truth had never mattered there unless it came from the stepfather's mouth. He walked past him, stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, quiet. The street looked the same as it always did. Parked cars. Dark windows. Nothing unusual. If someone were watching, they wouldn't see anything special. The young man stood there, phone in his hand. Waiting behind him, the stepfather followed, still talking. "You know what happens when you lie to people like this?" He said. "You embarrass yourself. And you embarrass this family." The young man didn't turn around. "I should call the police," the stepfather continued. "Tell them you're pretending to be involved with government business. See how fast they shut this down." "It won't be necessary," the young man said quietly. The stepfather snorted. "Oh, I think it will." The porch light flicked on, bright and harsh. It cast long shadows across the yard. The young man felt exposed, but he didn't move. He had learned patience the hard way. Minutes passed. The stepfather crossed his arms again. "Well," he said, "where's your Pentagon miracle?" The young man checked the time on his phone. Still nothing. He felt the familiar weight of doubt press against his chest. Not doubt about the call, but doubt about himself. About whether enduring this was worth it. About whether staying silent all these years had been a mistake. Growing up, he had learned to stay small, to keep his head down, to let the stepfather take credit, take space, take control. Every time he tried to speak up, he was shut down. Every time he showed confidence, it was called arrogance. Every time he showed knowledge, it was called disrespect. So he stopped trying. What the stepfather never knew is that silence didn't mean nothing was happening. It just meant things were happening elsewhere. "You see," the stepfather said after a while. "Nothing. Just like I said." Young man didn't respond. The stepfather leaned closer. "You want to be taken seriously? Then stop lying. Stop pretending you're something you're not." The young man finally turned to face him. "I never asked you to take me seriously," he said. "I just asked you to step aside." The stepfather's face hardened. "You don't tell me what to do?" Sound came suddenly. Low, distant, easy to miss if you weren't listening. The young man heard. At first engines, not loud. Not fast. Steady. The stepfather paused mid-sentence. What was that? The young man looked past him, down the street. The sound grew closer. One engine. Then another. The stepfather turned around, squinting into the darkness. "Probably just cars," he muttered, but his voice had changed. The young man stayed still. The headlights appeared at the far end of the street, then another set, then another. They moved. Slowly, smoothly, purposefully, the stepfather's mouth opened slightly. "What is this?" The young man didn't answer. The vehicles pulled closer, their dark shapes becoming clearer under the streetlights. Large, clean, identical, not the kind of cars that accidentally ended up on quiet streets at night. They slowed, then stopped. Right in front of the house, the engines idled. Deep and controlled, the stepfather's confidence drained from his face. His arms dropped to his sides. The young man felt his heartbeat steady. This was the part he never liked. Not because of fear, because he knew what came next would change everything. The first door opened, and then another. Figures stepped out. Moving with calm purpose, the stepfather whispered almost to himself, "What did you do?" The young man finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "I told you," he said. "They're coming." For the first time in that house, the stepfather had no words. The night had shifted. What had begun as a normal evening, tense with old arguments and unspoken frustrations, now carried a different weight entirely. The sound of engines idling outside had changed the rhythm of the house, and with it, the stepfather's sense of control. He had gone from confident and mocking to unsettled and silent. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one that made him glance at the young man with something like suspicion mixed with fear. The young man stood on the porch, calm but alert, his hands lightly gripping the phone. He had expected this night to arrive, had trained himself to respond in moments like this, but that did not make it easier. Every detail mattered now, every movement, every word. The black SUVs were perfectly aligned in front of the house, their surfaces glinting under the streetlights. They seemed to belong to a world far removed from the quiet, ordinary street. A world that no one in this neighborhood would expect to see in the middle of the night. Each vehicle looked identical, polished, and authoritative. The stepfather kept muttering under his breath, trying to make sense of the sight. Trying to convince himself that this was a coincidence or some elaborate prank. The young man ignored him. He had learned long ago that arguing with someone who refused to listen was useless. He turned his attention to the approaching figures now stepping out of the vehicles. They moved with a quiet precision, disciplined and deliberate. There was no hesitation in their movements. Every step, every gesture was measured. One of them, a woman in a dark suit, made her way to the front porch, looking around carefully before her eyes settled on the young man. "Are you the contact?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. There was no warmth, but no malice either. Her tone carried authority, the kind that demanded attention without raising itself. "Yes," the young man replied, keeping his voice steady. He stepped aside to let her onto the porch. "I've been waiting," the woman nodded. "We need to speak inside." The stepfather finally found his voice. "Inside? What is this? Who are you?" His words came out hurried, a mix of panic and defiance. "You can't just, this is my house." The young man stayed silent, meeting the woman's eyes briefly, a subtle gesture to signal her to continue. She glanced at the stepfather, assessing him with a cool, professional detachment, as though he were an irrelevant background detail. "You're not in danger here," the woman said. "But we need cooperation. This is a sensitive matter, and time is critical." The stepfather's face turned red, a mixture of anger and confusion. "Sensitive matter? You think I'm supposed to believe this? You think some suits and black cars justify all this nonsense?" The young man finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "They are not here because of nonsense. They are here because what I was involved in matters." The stepfather scoffed, shaking his head as if he could brush the whole moment away. "You always say that. You always act like the world is waiting for you." "Well, the world isn't waiting, and you're still just a kid in my house?" The young man took a slow breath, remembering all the times he had felt powerless. All the times he had been dismissed or laughed at for speaking truth. Now, though the truth had arrived in a form that could not be ignored, "Step aside," he said quietly. "Please." The stepfather hesitated, looking at the approaching SUVs again. Then, at the disciplined figures now moving toward the porch. Something in the air had shifted so subtly that he could feel it but not fully understand it. He stepped back reluctantly, muttering, "I don't know what's going on here, but this isn't over." The young man opened the front door, letting the woman enter first, then following close behind. The inside of the house felt different, somehow smaller and ordinary compared to the precise and purposeful energy now filling the room. The officials looked around but did not comment. Their focus was entirely on him. "I'm going to need to see the communication logs," the woman said, motioning toward the living room. "We need to verify a few details before we move forward." The young man nodded. "I've already done that. Everything is ready." The stepfather hovered in the background, trying to grasp the situation. His face was pale now, and his earlier arrogance had vanished entirely. He opened his mouth to speak, to question, to dismiss, but the young man didn't give him the space. He gestured toward the door, signaling him to wait. "This isn't about you," he said softly, but firmly. The stepfather froze, realizing that his previous control no longer applied here. The woman glanced at him. "You need to understand that this is highly sensitive. Any interference could have consequences." The stepfather's shoulders tensed, but the young man ignored him. Instead, he focused on the details now. He guided the officials toward a small desk where he had set up a laptop, papers, and encrypted notes. Everything had been prepared meticulously. Ready for the moment the call came, the room smelled faintly of polished wood and late-night air. It smelled like tension, like waiting, like the quiet before something monumental happened. "We need to confirm identities," the woman continued, "and ensure that no unauthorized individuals are involved." The young man nodded and handed over the verification details. Every step was precise. Every interaction was deliberate. He had spent years preparing for moments like this, though the people around him had never known. The stepfather hovered awkwardly behind the officials, trying to assert some presence. "So this is real, huh?" he muttered, almost to himself. All of this is real." "Yes," the young man said simply. "It's real." The room went silent for a moment. The officials exchanged brief, calculated glances. The woman spoke again. "We'll need you to come with us shortly. There's no time to explain everything here, and the situation requires discretion." The young man's stomach tightened. He had anticipated this, but the reality of leaving his home under such scrutiny, with all eyes on him, was heavier than he imagined. He turned slightly to glance at the stepfather. "This isn't a joke, and it's not about proving anything to anyone here. It's about doing the right thing at the right time." The stepfather opened his mouth to argue again, but found no words that could challenge what was happening. The young man's calm authority, his quiet confidence, contrasted so sharply with the stepfather's bluster that the room seemed to tilt in a new direction. One of the men in a black suit stepped forward. "We have transport waiting outside. You'll need to move quickly and stay focused. Do not engage with anyone else on your way." The young man nodded again. "Understood." He looked back at the stepfather, who was still trying to process the unfolding events. "I hope one day you understand," he said quietly. "That respect is earned by what you do, not by the power you try to force on others." The stepfather flinched, not expecting those words. He opened his mouth, closed it again. The room felt heavy with unspoken acknowledgement outside. The engines of the black SUVs continued to hum steadily, a quiet reminder of the world that had arrived on his street. The young man could feel the weight of responsibility pressing against him, but he had carried it before. This was not new. What was new was the certainty that now, for the first time, the world outside his home would see him as he was. The woman stepped closer, handing him a small identification badge. "This will grant you clearance for the next steps," she said. "Keep it visible. Do not remove it until instructed." He took it, nodding. Everything felt precise. Everything measured. He was ready. The stepfather finally spoke again, his voice low. You're really involved in something like this?" "Yes," the young man said. "And it's bigger than this house. Bigger than what anyone in this room imagined?" The officials moved toward the door. The young man took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the night. The weight of everything he had kept secret, and the reality of what was about to unfold. He glanced one last time at the house. At the stepfather frozen in place, at the quiet street now lined with black SUVs. He knew that nothing inside this home would ever feel the same again. The officials stepped outside. The young man followed, moving with them toward the vehicles. Every step felt deliberate, calculated, filled with purpose. He had spent his life preparing for moments like this, and now, finally, he was exactly where he needed to be. The stepfather remained on the porch, watching silently. He wanted to speak, to assert control, to reclaim his authority. But he had learned, in those few moments, that some truths could not be denied. Some people could not be contained by disbelief or mockery. The young man climbed into the first SUV. Closing the door behind him, the vehicle felt solid, safe, and surprisingly calm. Despite the urgency of the night, the engines roared softly, then the convoy began to move one by one down the street. The young man leaned back, breathing slowly, feeling the quiet intensity of the moment settling around him. Inside, the world waited, full of challenges and responsibilities he had only glimpsed before. But he was ready now, calm, precise, and unafraid. And behind him, on the porch, the stepfather stood, forced to witness the truth he had refused to believe. The young man moving forward into a reality far larger than any room, any house, or any argument could contain. The night air was still, but nothing would ever be the same again. The SUVs moved silently through the streets, their dark bodies cutting through the night like shadows with purpose. Inside the first vehicle, the young man sat upright, hands resting lightly on his knees. The interior was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of an officer speaking to another over a small earpiece. Every now and then, he glanced out the tinted windows at the streetlights passing by, each one a small reminder of the ordinary world he was leaving behind for the night. Even with all the planning, all the preparation, he could feel the tension settling into his chest. This wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, it was about accountability. It's about responsibility, about being trusted to do something bigger than anyone around him had ever imagined. And yet, despite all the seriousness of the moment, a part of him felt calm. He had been ready for this for a long time. He had trained himself to respond with control, to act deliberately, to stay present even when fear tried to creep in. Behind him, the other SUVs followed like shadows, perfectly synchronized, moving with quiet precision. He could see the faint outlines of the officials inside, some checking devices, others speaking quietly over radios. Their presence was imposing, but it was not threatening. It was methodical, professional, and focused. He thought about the house he had just left behind. The walls that had always felt suffocating now seemed smaller, almost insignificant in comparison to what lay ahead. He thought of his stepfather, frozen on the porch, mouth slightly open, trying to understand something he could not yet comprehend. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing that for the first time he had spoken truth and been believed, that his silence had finally been recognized. The first SUV came to a stop in front of a building that was surrounded by the same sense of quiet authority he had seen in the vehicles. The exterior was plain, almost unremarkable, but the air around it carried an intensity that made him straighten up immediately. The building seemed ordinary to anyone else, but he knew it was anything but. Inside, decisions were made that affected lives, required precision and trust. One of the officials opened the door and stepped out first. "We'll move quickly," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Follow me and stay focused. Do exactly as we say." The young man nodded. He stepped out of the SUV carefully, feeling the weight of the night air, the responsibility of the moment. Every step was deliberate. He didn't rush, but he didn't hesitate as they approached the entrance. The stepfather's earlier disbelief felt like a distant memory. There was no room for it here. This place demanded results, clarity, and discipline. The young man could feel the difference instantly. Even the lights and sounds were purposeful. Nothing was wasted. Inside, the officials moved with precision, guiding him through corridors that seemed endless. Every door they passed had a purpose. Every hallway felt like a path that led deeper into something far beyond ordinary life. He noticed the quiet attention of the security personnel, their eyes scanning, their movements sharp and controlled. Every single person had a role, and they executed it flawlessly. They entered a room where several more officials were waiting. The young man recognized some of the symbols and codes from his training, the ones that had been drilled into him over months of preparation. Even though he had never fully been part of this world before tonight, he could feel it around him, like a language he had always known but never spoken aloud. "Take a seat," one of the senior officials said. His voice was steady and calm, carrying the kind of authority that did not need to shout. "We've been waiting for you," the young man complied, sitting at the table, hands folded lightly in front of him. He could feel the eyes on him, not judging, but assessing, measuring, weighing the value of every action he had taken. "Every decision he might make tonight, you have been discreet," the senior official continued. "That is rare. You have demonstrated patience and control. That is why we came personally." The young man felt a flicker of recognition in those words. All the years of being dismissed, laughed at, ignored, they had been preparation. Not just for survival, but for moments like this, where he would be trusted with something far bigger than himself. One of the officials handed him a tablet. We need confirmation on a series of details. We also need you to coordinate a few points that only you understand. He took the tablet and nodded, quickly entering the necessary codes and responding to the queries. Every movement was deliberate, precise. He could feel the respect in the room, quiet and steady. Not given because of his age or status, but because of his competence, his focus, his understanding of what needed to be done. Meanwhile, the SUVs remained outside, engines low and controlled. A silent reminder that the world outside the building was ready to respond if anything went wrong. The young man could feel the tension, the energy, but he did not panic. He had been trained for moments like this. He had prepared for situations that demanded composure, precision, and clear thinking. The officials watched as he worked, their expressions unreadable, but attentive. There was a moment of silence as he finished one of the more complex sequences. One of the women in the room nodded slightly. "Good," she said. "We've confirmed it. Now we need to move quickly to the next phase." The young man felt his pulse steady. He knew that the next steps would be even more critical. Every action, every decision, every movement would matter. And yet, he remained calm. The focus he had cultivated over years of being underestimated, dismissed and doubted, served him well now. He looked around the room, taking in the officials, their calm authority, their quiet efficiency. He realized that this was a world completely different from the one he had lived in until now. A world where trust was earned, not demanded, and where competence was recognized immediately. Without question, one of the officials spoke again. "We need to move to the secure area. Follow closely and do not speak unless spoken to. Understand?" He nodded, understanding completely. He had learned long ago that in moments like these, words could be dangerous. Action, precision, and focus were what mattered. They moved through a series of corridors, each step deliberate, each door opening to another level of security. The young man could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, but it was a familiar weight. It was the kind of pressure that honed focus, that demanded clarity. As they reached the secure area, the young man noticed the presence of additional personnel, each equipped with devices, maps, and communication tools. Everything was coordinated, measured, and precise. This was not chaos. This was order. The senior official turned to him. "You have proven yourself capable, but remember, this is just the beginning. Discretion and precision are everything from here on." He nodded silently, feeling the gravity of the situation. There was no room for error, no room for hesitation. Every decision he made tonight could have consequences far beyond what anyone in this room might imagine. The young man took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had trained for this, prepared for this, and now he was here, in the eye of something much bigger than himself. He could feel the intensity, the focus, the responsibility in every corner of the room. One of the officials handed him a set of instructions, each one critical and time-sensitive. He reviewed them carefully, making mental notes, preparing for immediate action. The level of precision required was intense, but he welcomed it. He thrived under pressure, learned to control it, now relied on it entirely. The night outside continued, quiet but charged. The black SUVs waited, engines softly humming, a silent assurance that the operation could proceed without interference. The young man felt the weight of the night pressing down on him, but he did not flinch as the minutes passed. He completed the first critical task, confirming codes, authorizing access, and ensuring that the operation could move forward smoothly. The officials nodded silently, acknowledging his competence without words. Respect had been earned, quietly, efficiently, and without fanfare. Finally, one of the officials turned to him. "This is the moment where your role becomes pivotal. You understand what is at stake, yes?" He nodded, his hands steady. "I do. I've prepared for this." The senior official gave a brief nod. Good, then, let's proceed. The young man felt a surge of focus, every part of him alert, aware, ready. The work ahead would demand everything he had, but he was prepared. Every moment, every decision, every action would matter, and he was ready to meet it. Outside, the SUVs remained as silent sentinels, a reminder that the world beyond the walls of the building was ready to support them. Inside, the young man and the officials moved forward, each step precise, deliberate, and full of purpose. The night had changed completely from the moment he had left his home. Nothing would ever feel ordinary again. And in that quiet intensity, he finally understood the true weight of responsibility, the quiet power of trust, and the unmistakable clarity that came from being prepared, focused, and believed in for the first time in his life. The young man had never felt anything like the weight of responsibility that settled on his shoulders now. The room was quiet, yet every corner vibrated with purpose. Every face in the room was calm, controlled, but alert. They moved with precision, checking screens, exchanging brief phrases, and coordinating actions that he knew could change outcomes in ways most people could not even imagine. He had prepared for moments like this, though he never could have imagined the magnitude of it. Years of practice, patience, and quiet observation had led to this exact point. He felt the calm certainty in himself that came only when a person knew they were exactly where they needed to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. One of the officials spoke quietly to him, handing over a secure device. "We're about to begin the critical verification. Your role is central to ensuring success. Pay attention to every detail." He nodded, feeling his pulse steady. He had been trained to notice patterns, to anticipate problems, and to act before situations escalated. Every small action mattered. Every step, every choice carried weight. Meanwhile, back at his home, the stepfather was pacing. He had not moved from the porch after the young man left. His mind was racing. His confidence, once so solid, had crumbled into confusion and doubt. The SUVs, the disciplined figures, the professional presence, it was all real. He could no longer dismiss it as a prank or exaggeration. He pressed his hands to his face for a moment, breathing hard. He had underestimated the young man for years, thinking that age, authority, and control were enough to suppress his voice, his competence, his ability. Now he realized that all of that had been wrong, and he hated feeling powerless. Back at the secure building, the young man activated the first set of verification protocols. His fingers moved quickly and deliberately across the device, entering codes, confirming identities, and cross-checking encrypted files. The officials observed silently, nodding at key points, their expressions unreadable but appreciative. "This is going perfectly," one whispered to another. "He understands exactly what's required." The young man did not notice the words. He was focused entirely on the task. Years of being ignored, dismissed, and underestimated had honed him into someone who thrived in moments like this. He did not need validation. He only needed focus. A senior official approached, placing a hand lightly on the young man's shoulder. "The next phase will be visible soon. Be ready to coordinate with our field teams." He nodded. The words were simple, but the meaning was immense. He understood that the next phase could have consequences far beyond the walls of this room. One small mistake could ripple outward, affecting countless people. The responsibility was immense, but he welcomed it. At that exact moment, back at home, the stepfather's phone buzzed. He jumped at the sound, quickly grabbing it. It was a short message. "All protocols are in motion. He is handling the situation." He froze, staring at the screen. His mind could not process the words fast enough. He had underestimated the young man. He had mocked him, laughed at him, dismissed him. And now, the reality of what was happening was undeniable. The young man continued to work methodically, confirming codes, authorizing secure access, and ensuring that all communications were encrypted and verified. Every screen he touched, every instruction he gave, was precise. There was no hesitation, no room for error. One of the officials looked up at him. "This is the point where your decisions will directly affect the outcome. Remember everything you've been trained to do." He nodded. "I understand." Minutes passed like hours. The intensity in the room was palpable. Yet despite the pressure, he felt calm, grounded, and entirely in control. He was finally recognized for the skill and preparation he had carried quietly for years. This recognition was silent, without applause or fanfare, but it was real. It was acknowledgement in its purest form. Back home, the stepfather was pacing again, running through every memory, every interaction he had ever had with the young man. He remembered dismissals, arguments, and moments when he had laughed at his claims. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He had been completely wrong. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The stepfather froze. His heart raced. He glanced out the window to see the familiar black SUVs waiting, engines silent now, but presence undeniable. His earlier disbelief was gone. Fear had replaced it. The young man in the secure facility received confirmation that the field teams were ready. "They're moving into position now," one of the officials said. "Your coordination has ensured that everything will go smoothly." He allowed himself a brief moment to exhale. This was the result of years of preparation, patience, and focus. All the times he had been doubted had led to this moment. He had been ready, and now the world was relying on his skill, his knowledge, and his precision. Meanwhile, the stepfather had stepped outside to watch the vehicles more closely. The realization of his mistake weighed on him heavily. He had dismissed the young man, ridiculed him, and assumed that control over the household was absolute. But what he was witnessing now was proof that authority could not be imposed through fear alone. It had to be earned through competence, through trust, and through quiet strength. Inside the facility, the young man moved to the next step, authorizing secure communications and verifying multiple points of contact. Every action was deliberate, every decision precise. The officials continued to observe, their silent approval evident in the subtle nods and glances exchanged between them. He glanced at the clock, noting how quickly time had passed. The night had become a blur of focus, tension, and precise action. Yet he remained calm. He had trained himself to thrive in these moments, and now he was finally operating at the level he had always been capable of, unrecognized until now. Back at the house, the stepfather's phone buzzed again. Another short message. Operation confirmed. Coordination successful. He is proceeding as planned. He dropped the phone in disbelief. His mind struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. Every assumption he had made about the young man, every doubt he had expressed, every insult he had hurled, all of it now felt painfully naive. Inside the secure facility, the young man received final confirmation from the field teams. The operation was a success. Every communication verified, every step executed precisely. He allowed himself a quiet smile, the first of the night. This was the moment he had worked toward silently for years, and now the results were undeniable. The senior official approached him, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You've done exceptionally well. Your skill, focus, and discretion have been crucial to this success." He nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. There was no need for applause, no need for recognition beyond this room. The acknowledgement from those who understood the magnitude of his work was enough. Meanwhile, the stepfather stood on the porch watching the black SUVs, his mind racing with questions he could not answer. He realized painfully that he had been wrong about the young man all along. The mockery, the disbelief, the constant underestimation, it had been misplaced. When the young man returned home briefly, escorted by the officials, the stepfather saw him enter with calm authority, his demeanor unchanged despite the intensity of the night's work. He walked past the stepfather without hesitation, not needing to assert dominance, because the truth of his capabilities was now self-evident. The stepfather's face turned pale. Words failed him. The young man had proven, without a single boast, that he was capable, competent, and trusted by people operating at the highest levels. All the power the stepfather had relied on in the household seemed trivial in comparison. The young man paused for a moment. Looking at him, "Respect," he said softly, "is earned by what you do, not by what you demand. I hope one day you understand that." The stepfather could only nod, words lost in the overwhelming realization of his misjudgment. He had spent years thinking control was everything, only to see that true authority comes from capability, discretion, and quiet strength. The night ended with the young man leaving once again with the officials, this time for the final debrief and secure transport. The stepfather remained on the porch, watching silently, processing everything he had just witnessed. He understood, finally, that his assumptions had been wrong, and that the young man had operated at a level far beyond what he had imagined. It was a turning point. Not just for the young man who had proven himself in a world few could access, but for the stepfather who had learned painfully that power and respect were earned, not imposed. The young man stepped into the waiting vehicle, calm and collected. He had fulfilled his responsibilities with precision, proving his worth not through argument or defiance, but through action, focus, and quiet competence. The night air seemed charged with the significance of the events, and he felt the satisfaction of knowing that he had been trusted, recognized, and successful at the highest level. Back at home, the stepfather remained, his thoughts heavy, but perhaps for the first time, a seed of understanding had been planted. He had been shown, without question, that the young man was far more capable than he had ever imagined. And in that moment, even if unspoken, the balance of respect in that household had shifted forever. The young man sat quietly in the vehicle, hum of the engine, the only sound beside the faint murmur of the officials around him. Outside, the night stretched dark and calm, the city lights flickering past as the convoy moved steadily forward. He had finished the operation, every task executed precisely, every decision made with care. Yet there was no rush of triumph, no burst of celebration. This was not a moment for boasting. The satisfaction came quietly in knowing he had fulfilled his responsibilities and had earned the trust of those who depended on him. He thought about the house he had left behind, about the stepfather who had spent years dismissing him, ridiculing him, and assuming control over every aspect of his life. He remembered the disbelief in his stepfather's eyes when the black SUVs had arrived, when the weight of the young man's truth became undeniable. That disbelief had slowly shifted to stunned acknowledgement, and finally to quiet understanding. The words had been few, the message was clear. Respect could not be demanded, could only be earned. The vehicle stopped briefly at a checkpoint. Officials moved swiftly, checking codes, verifying identities, and confirming that every security measure had been maintained. The young man remained calm, his hands resting lightly in his lap. Every glance, every movement, every breath was deliberate. Years of preparation had trained him for this exact level of focus. Even the slightest distraction could have consequences. He did not falter. Inside, the team continued their quiet coordination, communicating with each other with precision, issuing instructions, and receiving updates with calm efficiency. He observed, learning, confirming, and responding when necessary. There was a rhythm to their actions, a silent understanding that each person's role was critical, and that success depended on collaboration, attention, and trust. He thought back to the moment when he first received the phone call. The night he had stepped outside the house despite his stepfather's disbelief. That tension, the quiet defiance he had held in those moments, had carried him through countless hours of preparation. Every test, every challenge, every instance of being underestimated had led him here. And now, in the quiet hum of the SUVs, he understood the full significance of all those years. Meanwhile, back at the house, the stepfather remained on the porch. The black SUVs had left, and the quiet of the night settled over the street again. He felt an emptiness in the air, a sense of something he had lost and could not retrieve. He thought about the words the young man had spoken before leaving: "Respect is earned by what you do, not by what you demand." Those words echoed in his mind, each repetition sharper than the last. He replayed every interaction, every moment of disbelief, every instance where he had mocked or dismissed the young man. The weight of realization pressed on him. For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly underestimate someone, and what it felt like to be confronted with undeniable proof of their competence. Inside the SUVs, the young man reviewed the final steps of the operation. Every verification, every confirmation, every secure communication had been completed successfully. The officials around him nodded silently, acknowledging his precision and focus without words. There was no applause, no overt recognition, but the quiet approval was enough. He felt a subtle, deep sense of accomplishment, a validation that had nothing to do with ego or acknowledgement, but with the simple knowledge that he had performed perfectly when it mattered most. The night air outside the vehicle remained calm, yet charged with the significance of what had just occurred. Each vehicle moved in unison, maintaining a silent watch over the operation's outcome. The young man observed the movement of his surroundings, noting the efficiency, the discipline, and the quiet authority of the team. He felt at home in this environment, a stark contrast to the years of doubt and dismissal he had endured at his stepfather's house. He thought again of the stepfather. Despite the distance, despite the tension and the disbelief that had dominated their relationship, there was now a subtle shift. Even if unspoken, the young man sensed a change in the perception of authority, a quiet acknowledgement of his own capabilities. It was not validation he sought, but he could feel the presence of recognition forming. It's fragile, yet undeniable. The convoy reached a secure facility, and the young man followed the officials inside. The building exuded quiet efficiency, a sense of purpose in every detail. Each corridor, each room, each action was deliberate, measured, and purposeful. He felt the weight of responsibility settle over him once again, not as a burden, but as a mark of trust and recognition inside. The officials coordinated their final checks, confirming that the operation had been executed flawlessly. Every detail, every verification, every step had been accounted for. The young man observed, contributing when necessary, guiding with precision and calm authority. The experience was intense, yet he remained composed. This was the environment where his skills, honed over years of preparation and quiet diligence, were fully recognized. Back at the stepfather's house, the silence of the night pressed heavily. The realization of what had occurred was inescapable. The stepfather had witnessed, in fragments, the proof of the young man's capabilities. The house, once a place of control and assumed authority, now felt smaller, insignificant in comparison to the reality he had glimpsed. The street, the dark vehicles, professional presence, it all pointed to the undeniable truth that he had been wrong. The young man finished the final coordination, confirming that the operation had been successful. Every communication verified, every protocol completed, every responsibility fulfilled. He allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, feeling the culmination of years of preparation, patience, and silent diligence. The quiet satisfaction was profound. This was the reward for all the moments he had been dismissed, underestimated, and ignored. The officials approached him, acknowledging his work with quiet, deliberate gestures. There were no words needed beyond subtle nods. It's the kind of recognition that carried immense weight precisely because it did not rely on fanfare or applause. The young man felt the acknowledgement deeply, understanding that his competence had been recognized at the highest level. As he prepared to leave with the officials, he glanced back at the city beyond the building, the streetlights flickering like distant stars. He thought about the house, the stepfather, and the years of doubt and dismissal he had endured. And yet, he felt no anger, no bitterness. He only felt clarity. The truth had been revealed. The work had been done. Respect had been earned, and he had fulfilled his responsibilities with precision, focus, and integrity. The vehicle doors opened, and he stepped outside, joining the officials as they moved toward the waiting SUVs. The night air was cool, filled with the quiet hum of engines and the subtle presence of authority. Every step he took was deliberate, measured, confident. He had learned over years of quiet preparation how to carry himself when stakes were high. Every movement, every decision, every action mattered, and he executed them all perfectly. Back at the house, the stepfather had not moved. He had remained on the porch, watching silently as the SUVs pulled away. As the young man left under the watchful guidance of the officials, he felt the weight of the night pressing down on him, a mixture of awe, fear, and reluctant respect. Every assumption he had held about the young man had been shattered. Every belief in his own absolute authority had been challenged and undone. The young man looked back briefly, not out of defiance, but out of quiet acknowledgement. He did not need to speak. The presence of the black SUVs, the successful operation, and his calm, composed demeanor spoke louder than words ever could. He had fulfilled his responsibilities. He had earned recognition, and he had left no room for doubt. The stepfather remained on the porch, watching, finally understanding that control, power, and respect could not be imposed by intimidation or authority alone. They were earned quietly, through action, competence, and integrity. The night air was still, but the lesson had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. The young man climbed into the first SUV, the doors closing smoothly behind him. The engines hummed softly, and the convoy began to move, returning him to the place where the operation would be debriefed and secured. Every step of the journey was deliberate, every movement precise. He felt the weight of responsibility, the focus of the moment, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had been recognized for his skill, preparation, and composure. As the vehicles moved through the city streets, the young man allowed himself a moment of reflection. Years of doubt, dismissal, and underestimation had led to this point. The night had revealed not only his competence to the world, but also the true measure of trust and responsibility. The work had been completed flawlessly. The results would have far-reaching consequences, though he would never boast or seek credit. His satisfaction was quiet, internal, and profound. Back at home, stepfather finally moved inside, closing the door behind him. The silence of the house was heavy, filled with the weight of realization. He had been wrong. He had underestimated the young man in every possible way. And now, the truth was undeniable. The young man had acted with competence, focus, and calm authority, proving that respect was earned through action, not demanded through intimidation. The night ended quietly, yet the impact of the events would be lasting. The young man had left with dignity, confidence, and recognition from those who truly understood the magnitude of his work. The stepfather had been forced to confront the reality of his misjudgment. And the true measure of capability, the young man's departure was not an ending, but a culmination. He had demonstrated what could be achieved through patience, preparation, and quiet strength. He had fulfilled his responsibilities, earned trust, and proved himself without a single word of arrogance or boast. The night had revealed the truth, and in that truth lay the lasting impact of action, integrity, and earned respect. And as the black SUVs disappeared into the distance, the young man sat back, calm, collected, and ready for whatever came next. The work was done. The responsibility had been met. The respect had been earned. And for the first time in years, he felt completely seen, completely capable, and completely free.